Hello and welcome to episode 190 of the Chills at Will podcast. Pleasure today to be joined by Ellen Birkett Morris. And a bit about her, she's an award-winning multi-genre writer, teacher, and editor based in Louisville, Kentucky. She's the author of Surrender from Finishing Line Press, and her poetry has appeared in Thin Air magazine, the Clackamas Literary Review, Juked, Alimentum, Gastronomica, Three Elements Review, and Inscape, among other journals. She won the top prize in the 2008 Binnacle Ultra-Short Edition and was a semi-finalist for the 2009 Rita Dove Poetry Prize. Her poetry has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Her fiction has appeared in Shenandoah, Antioch Review, Notre Dame Review, South Carolina Review, Sliver of Stone, Great Jones Street, Santa Fe Literary Review, and Upstreet, among other journals. She's the 2015 winner of the Bevel Summers Prize for her story, May Apples, and won the Betty Gabehart Prize for Fiction. Morris's plays have appeared in Mud City Journal, Monologue Bank, and Plays, the drama magazine for young people. Her 10-minute play, Lost Girls, was a finalist for the 2008 Heidemann Award given by Actors Theater. Lost Girls received a staged reading at Cincinnati's Arnoff Center. Her essays can be found in trade paperback books, including Nesting, It's a Chick Thing, the Writing Group Book, The Girl's Book of Love, and The Girl's Book of Friendship, in journals including Brevity Blog, The Common, The Butter, The Femme, and South Loop Review, and on National Public Radio. Morris teaches creative writing at the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis and the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning in Lexington, Kentucky. Ooh, that's a mouthful. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Did I get the stress right? Is it Birkett?
We say Burkett as if it was a U, but
Okay.
but I have relatives who say Burkett.
There you
So
go. There you go.
yeah, I'm just doing what my dad did. Yeah.
There was a bit of possibly of a Freudian slip where I said Louisville. I know it's Louisville.
Right.
Louisville. I know it's like
The more you slur it, the better it is,
there you
Louisville.
go. There you go. Well, heck of a CV, heck of a resume, and I'm just so impressed at the diversity, the variety of all of your creative work, and I'm pumped up to talk to you.
I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I'd love to know about kind of the beginnings. Your early reading and writing and your relationship with the written word was, magazines and books strewn all over the place at home. Kind of what was your early relationship with the written word?
Yeah, my father was a writer himself. He was a
Okay.
self-taught man, came from Detroit, kind of a Detroit street tough who
Mhm.
who left the city, got drafted, came to Fort Knox, but
Ah,
was really hungry to learn stuff. And so there were books of all types, philosophy, science, every kind of thing, and lots and lots of fiction everywhere. And
mm,
so reading was something that we all did together. He would take us to the library story hours, but he would also do things like read us Flannery O'Connor short stories as
mm.
bedtime stories, which is, really can get in your head when you're a kid.
Yeah.
I sort of credit some of what happens in my book of short stories, Lost Girls, to the influence of those kinds of really Southern Gothic stories early in life. And
Mhm.
and so story was a big thing in our house. I put together my own stories as a kid. I still have it. It's lined paper bound with ribbon, that sort of thing. So it was always something that I like to do. I'll be honest and say that I was really afraid to do it. Professionally, I was afraid to pursue it with any vigor because I was afraid I'd be bad at it.
Mm.
And I reached my mid-30s and I thought, if you don't do this now, you're never going to do it. And of course, I was bad at it because you have to be bad before you can be good.
Mhm.
And started writing poetry, got some small success there, and it sort of catapulted me into other kinds of writing.
Hmm. So I don't think Sam's the right name, but you have a character in one of the last stories, maybe the last one, who is from one of the big cities, maybe Cincinnati, and came to Fort Knox. Maybe kind of based on your dad a little bit.
Yeah, it really could
At
be.
least that
Yeah,
basic
just
detail,
the
yeah.
general vibe, perhaps.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I'd love, you talk about like not being good at writing, and we all get that. It's, starting off. were they too, was your work overwrought? Was it too emotional? Were they not realistic? Is it easy to kind of pinpoint how they were not good?
That's the thing. I mean, I think with poetry, particularly, the early pitfalls are always either, too sentimental or perhaps too jokey, that you may have the tone wrong.
Mm,
I think too that as you write, you begin to learn how to pick just the right word
mm,
for what you're trying to say. And then, as I continue to write, you begin to learn sort of the magic of sort of populating stories and poems with very specific items that then gain metaphoric weight as you tell the story. And so all of that was just incredible to see how, to see kind of how this really works. And the more
mm.
I did it, the sort of better I got at doing that world building, which is really what anybody
Right,
wants. They want to be dropped into the world of your story or poem, or
right.
yeah. So
Maybe 20 to 25%. I can give you some royalties. I want to use metaphoric weight, the term you just used. Can I use that for like my next book? My first book?
absolutely.
All right, I'll give you 20, 25, something like that. Only
There we go.
20. I like that phrase.
Yeah.
You mentioned Flannery O'Connor. Did you read, quote unquote Southern writers? Did you read all right? Like, who were some of the writers who were really instrumental in kind of shaping your likes and dislikes and preferences?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did read a lot of Southern women writers. So Bobby Ann Mason's early
Mm,
short stories, were so fantastic. Barbara Kingsolver also started with short stories. And
mhm.
then of course everything she's written is just, fantastic. And I'm so thrilled that she got this long deserved prize, the Pulitzer. That was so good. Uh, I remember reading Elizabeth Berg, partly because although her stuff wasn't really literary, she would include in that like insights about human nature.
Mhm.
Honestly, I really liked Hemingway a lot. I mean, I like the economy of his sentences.
Mm,
And so that's something that I've always, well, my real writing training was in journalism. So I've learned to write short. And so I think I carry that sort of economy into the short stories that I write, and that you're not going to see a lot of really lengthy stage setting with me.
mhm.
I'm kind of going to get you right into that story. So
Definitely.
those were some influences. And then here of late, Elizabeth Strout, the intimacy of her writing, and how just deeply into her characters' heads she gets. It's kind of amazing. So
That's interesting. You talk about you really do. I mean, you get right into the action, and it's and that's a skill because it's like, okay, cool, we're here. It's not like, wait, what happened? Like it's, there's a lot in the silences in your work about what's not said, about what's not written that speaks so loudly. But I happen to read yours on ebook, and like it shows you like 2 pages at a time,
yeah.
and so like I would sometimes like accidentally I would skip and I'd be like, wait, is that like all that happened in that short time? I look at them like, yes, it did. Wow. Like that's in a total compliment. Like, man, that economy of language, the Hemingway, the I don't know who the names thrown out, like Raymond Carver, that kind of thing. But it was like, whoa, that all happened in a page and a half or two. Like, man, pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. And I do think that sort of, packing all that stuff in also gives it a sort of a velocity,
Mm,
as a story itself in terms of the dramatic pace of it. And also, just emotionally when you're just drop right into what matters. The
mm.
key is that, people understand why it matters.
Why it matters, yes. Yeah, you're talking a little bit about the current writers. Anybody else who really inspires and thrills? Like, oh man, I can't wait for her next book, his next article.
Yeah. I love George Saunders. I think he's
Hmm.
fantastic. He does stuff I could never do, and he does a lot of really weird stuff, but he does it so very, very well. You know,
Hmm.
so I really, really like that. Um, yeah, I really enjoyed Rebecca Mackay's latest book. I
Okay.
have some questions for you, where she talked about the murder of a young woman, at a boarding school. But at the same time as that she focused on this particular case, she also sort of wove a narrative about women in general and the ways in which they get, kidnapped or murdered and disappeared. And she did it in a really kind of graceful way. So the focus was both really large and also very focused, So I really like her work too. Yeah, and as I mentioned, Elizabeth Strout, I always kind of wait for what she's got coming out. I just recently, actually just today, finished Yellowface, and I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yes, definitely.
Oh,
It's on my to-read list.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's just it's such a kind of incisive portrait of the publishing world and what it feels like to be in it, and social media and the way people are treated in that, and the sort of loneliness that can be a part of the job, and for this particular character, even some level of desperation, which was really hard to watch, but also very captivating.
Oh,
So
wow. I feel like it was
yeah,
just today or yesterday that somebody on Twitter that I followed said like read that like in one sitting type of thing. That read that
it
book.
was
Yeah,
something else.
definitely got to get to it. Oh, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So the main thrust of the conversation is going to be Lost Girls, the short story collection. But like, I'm just like so impressed. There's, it was made into a play. Looks like about maybe 15 years ago. Um, or the 10-minute play was Lost Girls. There's poetry, there's fiction. I mean, what are the creative muses? Like, how do you manage to write in these different mediums? You were talking about dramatic pacing a little while back. I mean, is that, those kind of things you think about differently when you're writing poetry versus fiction?
Oh, absolutely. I do think I do think it's all different. And I think part of it is, I think having been a journalist really primed me to try different stuff, because I was used to doing things on assignment. So I could sort of pretend that I was okay, write a poem about this, or, let's work around with short stories, or, hey, let's try a novel, and I felt comfortable trying different things because I'd written different kinds of stuff before that. And then, I guess sometimes the thing itself dictates what it's going to be. So I had this anecdote about me and my father, where I was young. We were watching Saturday Night Live, and the Rolling Stones were on the screen, and Mick Jagger goes over and he starts to literally lick Keith Richards' lips. And I was like, wow, what is going on? I was really fascinated. My dad was like really freaked out. And I thought, well, this is an essay about like the different ways different generations view things. Started to try to write it. Really, it was a poem. So it turned out to be a poem about, because it was just that moment. It was that moment of when we realized that we saw this thing completely different, and then I sort of, for the poem, created a moment with his father where he had his ear to the radio, and his father, but his father wasn't, interested in what he was interested in. So it's like letting things kind of tell me what they're going to be, figuring out what they're going to be. And so I've got a novel that's going to be forthcoming in 2024 that began as a short story. I took it to a workshop. The workshop leader, Erin Flanagan, who's out of Dayton, Ohio, who's so fantastic, said, you need to up the marital tension in this short story. So I did. And then she said, wow, I think this could be a novel. Well, 8 years later, many, 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 many drafts. So I guess part of it too is that you're open, that you're open to trying the different stuff, or you're open to expanding those things that might have the potential to be expanded. And in terms of my publishing credits, I would say that that's a function of fearlessness when it comes to submitting. Because I was used to having my name in print, I sort of had a predisposition towards wanting that. And so I was pretty fearless in submitting. And so I would get tons of rejections, but for every 150 submissions, I might get 2 or 3 acceptances. And that sort of fueled me to continue the work and to continue to send out. So, yeah.
You were mentioning the novel. I don't know what you can tell us about Donald L. Jordan, etc.
Oh, absolutely. So there's a sort of somewhat little known literary prize called the Donald L. Jordan Prize. Donald L. Jordan himself just died recently. He's a businessman who has endowed a literary prize in perpetuity at Columbus State University in Georgia. And it's administered by Alan G., the writer Alan G., and it is a $10,000 prize and a publication contract. So it's pretty astounding for writers. And this past year, I entered twice, and this last year I was a finalist. It was being judged by Lan Samantha Chang of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and she picked the book. So yeah, so talk about a boost in confidence and a real vote of confidence. And so it'll be out next February. But I would encourage people to look at it because they do a book every year, and every year they've got a judge who's like her, who really knows their stuff. And and again, I sort of shoot high because you really don't know. Work, and then shoot high, right? I mean, that's sort of my philosophy.
Congratulations, that's so cool.
Thank you. I'm super excited. It's called Beware the Tall Grass. It's a novel in alternate viewpoints between a mother of the parents of a young son who has past life memories and the Vietnam soldier whose memories the son has.
I'll be sure to post the the information on the episode notes here, for the prize. Again, it's called the Donald L. Jordan Prize. And to quote LeVar Burton, don't take my word nor even Ellen's for it. Miss Chang's blurb about the book is, quote, in this beautiful novel, two stories separated by half a century intertwined to create an indelible narrative of peace and war. In the throes of his first loss, young Thomas joins the army and travels to Vietnam, where he's propelled toward his fate. Decades later, in another time and place, Eve and Daniel welcome their infant son and resolve to set aside their own family ghosts. But is it possible to release the past? Can powerful experiences of love and death ever be forgotten? Through surprising and suspenseful turns, Beware the Tall Grass explores the evocative mysteries of time and memory. Wow. Unquote. Very cool.
Thank you.
Lost Girls came out in 2020, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, was this go ahead.
It was June of 2020.
I was just going to ask, so was that, I assume it was done way before COVID hit, but how did that work with publicity and all that too?
It worked. It was really, really tough. I did a online launch event with my local independent bookstore, Carmichael's Bookstore, with the writer Lee Martin from Columbus, Ohio. And so that was lovely. And we had a nice little crowd. And we had a great conversation. But really, honest to God, there was just so little that could be done. I sort of, because I have a background in public relations somewhat, I sort of spent the first couple years of COVID working to get the book out there, doing podcasts, sending out press releases, approaching people who had columns, writing guest columns, submitting it for review. I went through a very small press. So the onus was really on me to do all of it. And I did it partly because as long as I was thinking about that, I wasn't thinking about COVID. So.
Dude, that's kind of parallels just my podcast in general. My podcast first episode was April 2020. Give you something to do, right?
Yeah.
A way to be creative, a way to get out there, a way to talk to great people. The collection is, like I said before we started recording, the collection makes you feel. Wow, there's some big emotions. There's an incredible amount of profundity in the collection. Do you call it a linked collection? There are a few characters, that come back around and we're more or less in the same settings, but they're not exactly the same. Would you call it a linked collection?
I would call it a loosely linked collection of stories. And I was thinking about Winesburg, Ohio.
Okay.
I was thinking about, particularly with some of these characters had a little odd twist to them. And so Sherwood Anderson talked about grotesque, and he talked about, you know, how these people all had something that was a little bit different. So that was kind of what I was going for there, is that I was going to give some of these characters just a little bit of a twist, set them all roughly in the same small town.
Right.
You know, there's going to be that pressure of everybody thinking they know each other well.
Mm.
You know, do they or don't they? Right. I mean, everybody's got their own secrets and their own things they're dealing with. So
Yeah. The first story is called Lost Girls. It's the titular one. It's I mean, is that a short? Is that flash fiction? Would you put it in
yeah, I
that
think it's
genre?
technically Flash. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And it really, I mean, it sets the tone in many ways. It has the same title. So actually going backwards slash forwards a little bit, the author notes mentioned that the book collection is that the story collection is a lot of it is based on a real life incident in your life. I wonder if you could maybe give us a little background on the kidnapping.
Yeah, yeah. So that story in particular really is the thing that sort of sparked my desire to do a collection around issues that involve women and girls.
Uh,
And so the kidnapping itself happened when I was a senior in high school, and the child of some Russian immigrants, her name was Anne Gottlieb, got kidnapped from uh, this mall that was near where I lived at the time. So there was this mall, there was a field that you could cut through to get, you know, into the neighborhood, a field I'd walked through many times before. And you know, and she vanished. And you know, I don't think they ever really solved that one. And you know, the my primary thing with with the story was that behind it is this idea of how do you remember somebody who has been lost to history because of something like this? How do you honor them? You know, more than remember, how do you honor them? But I also complicated it by giving the girl protagonist some complicated feelings and emotions of her own surrounding her own parents and the lack of attention that she feels she has. And you know, I made it a little more complicated than, oh, I feel sorry for the girl who was taken, or I miss her, I want to honor her. You know, it was a little more complicated than that. And so yeah.
the you talk about how there's these complicated feelings. One of her quotes, the narrator, is, "No one would notice if I was gone." Right. So she's, I want to say, 18, and the one who was missing was Dana Lampton. She was 13.
13, yeah.
Right. And so the narrator, I mean, she feels like a type of, I don't know, envy when she sees like Dana's parents on the news, arm in arm, because like you said, her parents' situation is not a clean one for sure. And just this whole idea that like the narrator keeps feeling like that could have been me. And so she feels like she's living for Dana. And then every year she leaves something like she leaves something as tribute, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
and by the time the story's done, it's been 8 years. Dana's 21, and it's just, again, you're so good with what's not written. It just makes the reader think like, how much has happened in that 8 years? How much, what has happened to Dana? She's still with us. How much the narrator has changed, how much the world has changed, and all in that really compact piece, right?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's it. You know, I do think it's important to trust your readers, you know, trust them to get what you're going for, and trust them to fill in those blanks as they see fit, you know, with these stories. I mean, my biggest fear is always, is this overdetermined, or am I telegraphing things
Mm-hmm.
versus letting people come to their own conclusions?
The
Yeah.
second story is called Inheritance. And there's some real, I mean, there's sexual abuse, there's rape. The narrator at the hands of Daniel. Daniel is the son of the woman who has just died, right?
Right.
And so, I'm sorry, I forget. I'm not sure if the narrator's named in this story.
You know, I don't know that I've given you a name in this story.
I know you've got
I don't think I've given you one.
you've probably written 80,000 words, 100,000 words since then. So I don't blame you. But there's this idea of like that so the story starts out with her like staring at this woman who's laid out in the coffin, so to speak, and she's the sin eater. This it's this this tradition, I guess, that's identified with the quote unquote the rabble, which is what the older son says when from the upper class and all that. Is this a real? I almost didn't do the research on purpose. I'm usually all Wikipedia'd out, but like,
Yeah.
is this a British or British descent or people in the South? Like, is this about the idea of the sin eater? I've heard basic
Yeah.
about it, but yeah.
Yeah, this from what I've heard is it is of British origins,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned about it from my sister-in-law Jonna Walden, who lives in Lexington. She's a librarian, but she comes from Western Virginia,
Mm.
and she was talking about folkways, and she was talking about people saving people's teeth or their hair and stuff like that. And then she started talking about sin eating, and it was too great an idea for me to
Yeah.
let it go. It was just such a fantastic idea, and I kept it, and I kept trying to write about it.
Mm.
And it took being around, like, the election of 2016 before I could really figure out what it was I wanted to say. And it had to do with oppression, and it had to do with people without resources trusting people with resources to do the right thing for them.
Well, pun intended or not, you said it's a very grave idea, but yeah. So it's too grave an idea not to use. But you know, there's a sadness in the story. I mean, obviously, there's a deep, deep sadness in many ways. One of them that really hit me is very sad was that the mom of the narrator, she would see like this family as like benefactors, right? And so when the narrator kind of runs away or gets away, she would say like, "Oh, what are you doing? Like these are our benefactors." And just this idea of like being like you talk about oppression and seeing your oppressors as kind of keeping you going and kind of that perverse way. Um, there's she basically on multiple occasions is the victim of rape from Daniel, who's the son, and she when the sin eating is done, when she does it a few times, she makes herself vomit, and then she eventually becomes pregnant with his child, and she decides to escape. I'm gonna leave the ending of that story alone, but the title is so resonant. Inheritance. I wonder kind of what you're going with that again without being didactic about it, but it's just I felt like it was so important and so resonant.
Yeah. I think it can mean so many things. I really do believe that we inherit sort of certain traits just by virtue of our DNA. I find that different generations of my family have had different strains of things. They're dreamers, or they sort of are gamblers, or they believe in luck in some sort of way, whatever it is. But I also think, we can inherit things like institutional poverty and stuff, that those kinds of things can be handed down. And then of course, there's this idea that you're going to inherit somebody else's sin by eating a cake off their dead body, which is a whole other meaning to it. So I don't consider myself very good at titles, but that one really, really worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ending again will make you feel. Just put it that way. Very, very interesting and moving and affecting story.
Can I say that it was hard to write?
I bet.
That was a stage in my development as a writer when I made myself finish this story. This story is the most raw, the most emotional, the most heart-wrenching thing I've ever written. And to make myself write the ending that I wrote was really, really hard. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, saying ever is pretty strong, but I could clearly see why. Yeah. Why that'd be the hardest one ever. Oh man. Religion is the third one. So Alice walks into thinking she's going to how do you pronounce it? Decoupage?
Decoupage, like pasting things on
Yeah.
canvases.
Right. And
Yeah.
she thinks she's going to one of those classes at the local community center, but instead she stumbles into a breastfeeding group, right?
Right. Again, and I started with the premise that social groups like breastfeeding groups or other kinds of groups can feel like cults sometimes, can feel very much like cults. But when I started writing the story, I ended up someplace else completely. Ended up with the story about how loving those people were and how much she wanted to belong to the group, even though she didn't belong there at all. So
She didn't belong there at all. She, like I said, she's single. She doesn't have kids. She lied a few times about, oh, my son's, he's with his grandma. She loves him so much. And, but yeah, she really got a sort of intimacy with that group. Obviously, there's maybe no greater intimacy than, breastfeeding with a mother and baby, right? Just connections. She even goes so far as to get like a breastfeeding pump, right?
yeah, I thought, let's just play this straight and take it all the way down the line, And I have to say, while there's a lot of tenderness and sadness in the story, when I read it aloud, people laugh, and that's the
Yes.
best thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of humor there for sure. And yeah, behind every joke, there's a seed of truth, and there's definitely a dark humor in that piece, for sure. Harvest, man, this idea of Abby, the narrator, she at the beginning of the story, she gets rid of all her mirrors, not even like covering them up because people will be like, "What are you doing with that?" Right? She gets rid of all her mirrors. She basically calls herself. She talks about, I'm invisible now that I'm older. She's a woman of a certain age. I don't think it says exactly how old she is,
I think I do.
right? But
Yeah.
she's invisible. She's like, man, I never thought I would go obsolete, the type of thing. And there's so much in that story. Again, it's called Harvest, just about like vitality, right? And vitality that she longs for. Talks about the days of berry picking when she was younger with Tony, who comes up later again, right, in the book, in the collection. She gets knocked over. It's not a huge injury, but it's these kids on bikes. And again, the vitality, right? The ability to do something like that is just so much reminds her of what's the Barbara Streisand song, The Way We Were.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She really longs for that.